We will also talk about Ukraine's preparations for the peace summit, which is to be held in Switzerland this summer. We will also talk and recall the events of this week, in particular the Primary Summit, where the President of Ukraine Vladimir Zelensky took part. And in particular, we will start with the strikes that the army of the Russian Federation continues to make. Let's recall Putin's recent statements. Mikhail Podolyak, advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, is in touch with us. Mikhail, we are glad to see you. Welcome.
Yes, hello. Hello?
I would like to discuss a lot of events with you, but still, what is important, yes, today, it is the topic of strikes by the army of the Russian Federation on energy facilities, on critical infrastructure facilities. Today, indeed, a lot of people are talking about the Tripoli Central Center, and we will also remember it today. But I want to take a look right away and remind our viewers, what did Putin say recently during a meeting with Belarusian President Lukashenko? Unfortunately, we have seen a series of strikes on our power facilities recently and had to respond. Well, that's not even the question. What does he say next? Based on humanitarian considerations, we did not strike any strikes in the winter, bearing in mind that they wanted to leave social institutions, hospitals, and so on without power supply. But after the strikes on our power facilities, we were forced to respond. A short memory, it seems to me that Putin has, because to recall last winter and autumn, then somehow humanity hid somewhere, apparently. Therefore, cynically, a cynical comment. I absolutely understand. But still, Mikhail, the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, said on April 10th that the strikes on energy facilities would only intensify. Therefore, I want to ask you what Ukraine needs today in order to protect Ukrainians. First of all, to protect the energy infrastructure. Indeed, there is today's news. I think you will remember it. This is what Scholz, the German chancellor, voiced about giving Ukraine a patriot. But still, one patriot to what there is, it's probably not enough.
Well, you have good nerves. First of all, you listen to Putin, you continue to analyze what he says. It doesn't make any difference. Yes, a person just lies all the time. Look again, let's fix it. Russia is an aggressor country. We are discussing humanistic considerations with you. We do not strike at you in winter. We strike at you in spring, that is, and so on. That is, what kind of humanism can this subject with the disgusting surname Putin talk about at all? I want us not to forget about this, striking at the civilian population, at the critical infrastructure of a sovereign country, to which he has nothing to do. In other words, where is humanism here? In other words, it doesn't matter in winter, summer, spring, and so on. The subject by the disgusting surname Putin strikes at someone else's infrastructure. He does it meaningfully with one desire, to kill as many people as possible, to disrupt as many infrastructure institutions as possible, but in order for us to have big problems. That is, there are no other meanings here. In other words, a person specifically entered the territory of Ukraine in order to conduct a genocidal type of war. We must not forget this. Therefore, it does not make sense, of course, to analyze his statement and so on, because the essence of these statements boils down to this, to one premise. We've come to kill you. This is the first one. Second, as for protection from what Putin is doing. Of course, one patriot is certainly not enough. We need, as the president said, 20-25 pieces, yes, in order to be able to close the main areas in which the Russian Federation is working today, using cruise hypersonic ballistic missiles and drones in large numbers every night. To do this, we need a certain number of specific anti-missile systems, and to them a certain number of anti-missiles as such. And accordingly, of course, it is important that our European partners eventually understand that the presence of patriots in warehouses is of course very cool. It has a certain psychological impact there, that is. It kind of inspires confidence in them that they will be able to defend themselves from Russian missiles. But it seems to me that they should understand that Russian missiles can be stopped today on the territory of Ukraine, and thus preventatively rid themselves of the risks of war in European states. Well, that is, it's obvious again. But for this you need not 1, 2, 3 patriots, yes. But for this you need to mathematically accurately, let's say, draw on the map of Ukraine exactly how many territories you need to protect, and, accordingly, under this number, already allocate the number of anti-missile systems that Ukraine needs. This is an obvious thing. And, accordingly, Ukraine constantly talks about 3 components. First, the Russian Federation will continue to use the arguments it has. What arguments does she have? Cruise missiles on one side, guided aerial bombs on the other side. In order to resist all this, it is necessary to saturate Ukraine with a sufficient number of systems that can stop it. That is, the same anti-missile systems. And the third component is that it is necessary, in the end, to objectively assess where Russia gets financial opportunities, in order to reproduce an additional number of missiles that attack our critical infrastructure with the same calibers. The same Iskander Mk, the same, relatively speaking, 1069th already, which are much more dangerous than, as it turned out, than daggers, and which, by the way, are very similar to certain long-range missiles produced by Western countries. The same X-59th, 101st, and so on. Here are three factors that our partners need to eventually realize, not talk about it, but simply realize, and, accordingly, mathematically approach the solution of logistical problems. How much and when it is necessary for Ukraine to receive these systems. That's it. It's just what is the situation. You know, Ukrainians perceive just messages sometimes, and not only Ukrainians, rather incomprehensible messages from our allies. The first allies, the Ukrainian president says about this that these are our closest allies, the United States of America. I am now talking about Ms. Vallander's reaction to the strikes on Russian refineries. I want to quote what she said in response to a question from member of the House of Representatives Austin Scott, during a meeting discussing the topic of Russia's war against Ukraine, among other things. He asked why Ukraine should not attack Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. What Ms. Celeste Vallander said is, let me remind our viewers, the assistant to the head of the Pentagon on international security issues. I quote, "We have concerns about strikes on civilian objects, I emphasize. This is a sovereign decision of Ukraine, but we express this concern." There was also a statement message that allegedly Mr. Austin was somehow dissatisfied with the alleged Ukrainian strikes on the refinery. The International Energy Agency got involved in this story. This is an absolutely cynical statement, which sounds like this. World markets depend on Russian exports of diesel fuel, oil and aviation fuel, so stopping refineries can blow them up. What is the motivation of both Washington and the organization, as the International Energy Agency? The motivation is simple money. The motivation is simple many, let's say, assistants of different people, they worked for some time in lobbying structures that were related to the Russian energy lobby. I'm not specifically talking about Ms. Wallander, I'm generally talking about the fact that many worked in lobbying structures because the Russian energy complex spent a lot of money for this lobbying, in order to dominate certain industry markets and so on. This should be treated calmly. Again, I emphasize once again, this is a normal practice for the modern world. In other words, lobbyists say in one way or another that it is unprofitable, it is bad. It reduces our profitability in the literal sense of the word, our profitability. But it means their personal profitability and so on. And this is a normal discussion. Look, this is absolutely, once again, a normal discussion. Everyone has the right to express their point of view, but once again we will fix the facts, because the point of view is there. Opinions are normal. There are no problems for democratic communities. This is normal, but the facts are fixed. First, the Russian oil refinery is an unconditional military infrastructure, which is the infrastructure for ensuring aggressive war. Once again, this is a very important fact. Within the framework of international law, Russian oil refineries are military facilities. Look, I'm going to repeat it for the third time. Within the framework of international law, if someone in any country does not know anything, well, he is just a neophyte, does not understand what international law is, does not have legal knowledge, and so on. So, Russian refineries are the infrastructure of war, which requires destruction. That's it. This is the first point. The second point. Ukraine, proceeding from international law, by introducing a defense-type war, has the right and has obligations to destroy any infrastructure that is security within the framework of the aggressive war of the Russian Federation. In other words, we must destroy the infrastructure that allows Russia to wage an aggressive, unmotivated war against us. Accordingly, Ukraine is obliged to destroy Russian refineries. Not only refineries, of course, but there is a whole range of infrastructure, but refineries as well. The third point is a fact, concrete. Not everyone understands it, especially for people who like to publicly express their position. Russian refineries, within the framework of their production, do not affect the pricing of refineries, I emphasize. Not Russian crude oil of the Urals brand, but refineries do not affect pricing in the global energy market. In no way contribute to an increase or decrease in prices in this market, especially for products such as diesel, aviation, or any other gasoline derivatives, and so on. Therefore, all this is a manifestation of lobbying. Any statements that somehow characterize the impossibility of causing damage to Russian refineries, this is, let's say, a personal opinion that has the right to life, but in no way characterizes the state of the global market as such. In other words, to sum up, Ukraine is obliged to destroy the infrastructure of the war. Ukraine is obliged to strike at Russian oil refining. Ukraine does not affect pricing on the global market in any way with these strikes. Fourth, ignorance of how prices are formed in the global energy market is not a reason for Ukraine not to strike at one or another infrastructure. I remember that during the operation of both the American forces and the Allied forces in general, first of all, strikes were always carried out on energy routes, on fuel depots, on refineries, and, in general, on the enemy's energy infrastructure in order to... I'll interrupt you, right? Here I will ask a counter question. Look, and you have heard from Ms. Vlander's statements that Russia is striking at the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. And this significantly affects the lives of 40 million citizens of Ukraine. Have you heard such statements? The question is rhetorical. The question is rhetorical. And accordingly, Ukraine, having introduced a defensive war, has absolutely the right, within the framework of international law, to take those actions that will help accelerate the finale of this war. The Russian Federation has certain priorities that it uses to finance the war. This is the first one. Unfortunately, the sanctions today contribute to the fact that the Russian economy feels effectively and can continue to finance the war in full because many companies with a white jurisdiction of European or North American, continue to work in Russia, continue to pay taxes to military budgets, thus financing Russia's ability to wage war against us. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, Ukraine defending its territory, having these endless strikes on critical infrastructure. What are you talking about? On civilian infrastructure, on the civilian population, in principle, is absolutely reasonably waging war based on capabilities. Our capabilities are the same as they are on the front line, including the destruction of the Russian infrastructure. Therefore, as soon as we hear with you the proper assessments of what Russia is doing, look, once again, it's very important, as soon as we hear not abstract in the newspapers, but proper official assessments of what the Russian Federation is doing, and we do not hear them. Russia strikes critical infrastructure every night, and we do not hear proper assessments of the Security Council, for example, the UN. We do not hear proper assessments from our partners of what the Russian Federation is doing, because it is an unconditional genocidal component that requires certain legal assessments. As soon as we hear it, then it will be possible to respond to any other statements. So far, there are no official statements from the point of view of Russia inflicting genocidal-type strikes with one goal, and Putin, by the way, is publicly saying that we are already destroying the energy infrastructure so that people live in the 17th, 16th century. As the Russian Federation of Ukraine lives, we are destroying their entire heating infrastructure, electricity, water supply, and so on. That's when it will be possible to respond to any statements of any citizens of other countries. While there are no official statements, legally motivated statements, about what should be done if Russia strikes these strikes. What should be the legal consequences for Russia in connection with the strikes on the energy sector of Ukraine until then? You can ignore all these statements, which concerns the strikes of counter-Ukrainians of Ukraine on refineries of the Russian Federation. Mikhail, how should we treat the statements of the Kremlin's official representatives? I understand, yes, it's possible here. And there is, let's say, a scheme for how to treat the statements of such people. Naturally, I will not voice it on the air of the FreeDOM TV channel, but nevertheless, Dmitry Peskov, Putin's talking Rob, said that the Kremlin was allegedly ready to return to the Istanbul talks.